So, I'd like to begin by asking, I'll start with you, Stacy, and ask you to tell us the context in which you find yourself in the early childhood education arena.
I'm an elementary school principal, and Frost Lake, the school that I'm the principal of, is a pre-K through grade 5 school. We are a high poverty school. We also have what St. Paul calls language academy students, and those are newcomers to the country. So if students come to St. Paul and they end up in our region of the city and they do not speak English, they come to Frost Lake as the language academy school. We also have what is called a learning center, which is for EBD students who are at the federal setting and federal setting 2 and 3 levels. And we have closed the doors of our learning center and have our EBD students fully included in our general education classrooms. So Frost Lake, as a early childhood all the way through grade 5, focuses on co-teaching and full inclusion for all of our students.
Okay, thank you. Barbara.
I am an executive director for a community action agency, and the way that I touch children's lives is that I have 1,268 Head Start children, ages 3 and 4, and some of them are 5 years old. We provide our special ed services through the school system. We partner with lots of partners to make sure that we meet all the criteria for Head Start. The biggest challenge for us is to get our parents to be vital partners in their children's lives in our program.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Margaret Mahoney, and I'm the clinical director for the early intervention program in Lowell, Mass. Lowell is, we serve the city of Lowell as well as the surrounding suburban towns, so we have a very diverse population. Lowell is a real center for people coming in from lots of other countries as refugees and often just moving into Lowell, covering a broad range. So our population is very diverse educationally, economically, socially, linguistically. As an early intervention program, we're serving families of children ages birth up until just under 3 years of age. So all of the families, children that we see are children who either have developmental delays, diagnoses, or in Massachusetts, children are eligible for early intervention due to having risk factors, either family risk factors or child-based risk factors. So that also broadens our population. And what's a little bit different for our program today compared to what we've been talking about is, in addition to having a lot of really wonderful developmental specialists or educators, we also have as a vital part of our team physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, social workers, nurses, counselors. So the hiring issues and the staffing issues that we are talking about today is regarding educators. We're looking at that in terms of how that affects the professional development of these other disciplines as well. We also have one other program that is focused on at-risk pregnant women and their newborns, but that's more of a maternal child health model.
I'm Laura, and I operate a family child care program that serves children birth to age 13. I also collaborate with our local school district for pre-K services. So I have a pre-K teacher who comes in 3 hours a week to assure that the services that I'm giving are meeting all the standards of the pre-K. And I'm also a non-traditional student who's going to school nights and weekends working on a degree. I do not employ any other people. I'm the only employee. So I'm not going to be able to answer many questions on employment, but that's what I do.
Hi, Hannah Griffith. I am a preschool teacher in a public school district. I am an inclusive setting. I serve as the general education teacher and the special education teacher, and specialists come into my classroom. I have 2 classes, each comprised of 15 students, a third of which have special needs, a third are considered at risk, and then a third are typically developing students.
Okay. Well, all of you chose early childhood. we'd like to start by saying, what did you think you were getting into? What did you expect? And what did it turn out to be? And I'm going to start with Hannah.
Well, I think that when you go into early childhood, what you're thinking about is working with the children. I wanted to make an impact on these kids' lives, and the way that I found out that I could do it was definitely through special education. That was one of my passions that I found through college. But I think one of the things that what did it turn out to be? There was a lot of working with adults that maybe I didn't necessarily anticipate. I got into this to work with children and to work with, to make an impact in their lives, but we don't think about, especially in your undergraduate work, is that you have other adults to work with, you have specialists to work with, paraprofessionals in your classroom to work with, and even in my case, to manage. So that was kind of one of those twists and turns in my first year of teaching that I didn't anticipate, but had found some ways to get over that hump.
When I began childcare 20 years ago, it was to stay home with 3 teenage girls. And I quickly found that I had found my passion, and it was educating young children and making sure that they were having quality experiences that they may not have been getting anywhere else. And I've developed over the years taking classes and based on what I found I needed to learn, because being a parent really did not prepare me for being a business owner or taking quality care of children. So that's how I've developed my growth, and what I keep looking for in opportunities for development is to keep up with the new data that's coming out about child development so that those quality interactions continue to happen.
Well, when I originally came to the field of education, it was with a degree in special education, and I just somehow quickly found myself in the early childhood field, which then morphed into early intervention for me. I think in my original training, I think, as Hannah mentioned, the other adults that we all deal with all the time and are critical to the children's development are the parents. And I think in early intervention, it's the family that is our client or our participant. It's just the entire family, and we're in their homes. They allow us into our homes, and they kind of they trust us and to allow us in to help them. And I think that for many people coming into the field of early childhood, the training is around the kids, and the thing for everyone to start to learn more about is the work with the parents.
I got into education when I started as a college student. I had a sister who was disabled, and I couldn't figure out, my youngest sister, why she was disabled. So I never could help her with reading or math or any of those skills that my oldest sister and my oldest brother had. We were really sharp at reading, and she just didn't have it. And so when I went to college, I decided that I wanted to find out why is it that she could not learn to read. And that's where I started, and so I majored in special education. And from that point on, of course, now my sister, we're very close, and she still has problems with reading. But that was my start into the education arena. And from that point, I went to being a developmental delayed teacher. And my principal, how I got into administration, I'm pretty bossy, I'll be honest with you. And my principal, I would want to do things with my children, and he would, there were some roadblocks. Principals, I've been a principal too. And so I would tell him, I need to take my children here, I need to do this with my children. And this morning when they were talking about principals not understanding what goes on in the early childhood classroom, that was definitely my situation. So I told him that I was going to go back to school to be a principal so that I would know what to look for in an early childhood classroom. So I did. And from that point on, every job that I've had to deal with early childhood because I really, really love it. I love to go in classrooms. I can walk in a classroom and know whether it meets Eckerd standards and all of that good stuff. So I'm very excited about early childhood.
Stacy.
I chose 26 years ago to be a teacher because I really thought I was going to save children. And what I learned was that it isn't about saving children. It's about recognizing their strengths and who they are and building on that. And so a really good metaphor that we use in our school is that with our children coming in who don't know English, we have used such a deficit model for most of my career. We look at our students and we say they can't speak English. They don't know how to speak English. They're not good at English. And what we haven't ever said until recently is these children speak one or two or several other languages. They are emerging as bilingual students at whatever age they come in, and that is an incredible strength rather than a deficit of how we've historically viewed children in our schools. And it's the same with our children with special education needs, that the strengths that they bring are the pieces that we haven't identified and we haven't built on those. And so my greatest learning has been to quit making myself the savior and the missionary going in to save everyone and fix everyone, and actually stay in it and stay engaged long enough to learn what it is that the children bring and the families bring to us, and then build from there, which changes the culture of the school you're in. And I became a principal also so that I could get around that other principal so that I could get something done. Mm-hmm.
All right. So for those of you who are looking to hire people in the early childhood arena, I'd like to ask you to think about what you look for and as maybe your top 3 or 4 things that you're looking for in a prospective candidate. And for those of you who have been the candidate, I'd like you to answer the question, what would you like the person to know about you? What would you like that employer to know about the skills or the behaviors or whatever it is that you want to have shine in that interview? So we'll start with the employers and then we'll hear from folks who are employed. Okay, Stacy.
The number one quality that I look for, and I really try to dig this out of an interview or any initial meetings with possible job candidates, is an ability to be a reflective learner and to have the courage to stay within that stance for an entire career. Because you never know enough as a teacher. A teaching job is one of the most complex, complicated, difficult jobs in the world, and to think you go in knowing too much already is generally a problem. And so to have someone who has the courage to know they don't really know much and are willing to learn is the strongest piece that I can always find in someone. Related to that is a willingness to recognize that we all bring our own expectations to this work. And if I don't have the courage and the ability to mine my own beliefs that completely help define how I practice education, then I won't be successful. I will be successful with the children who look like me, who grew up like me. And in my school, that's very few children who look like me or grew up like I did. And so I have to be so aware of my own beliefs and how those might be limiting children in my school. And that takes a lot of courage to be able to go there and analyze that. Related to that is the idea that there is no teacher today that I know of who can be an independent contractor any longer. You cannot go into your room, close the door, and pretend that you're doing it all by yourself. And so if someone is coming into the field because they want their summers off, it's not the right job for them because it is that much more difficult than anything that most teachers realize. Minimum of 50 hours a week, right? Planning and prepping and doing it well enough to be able to sleep at night and not feel like you're,
I think that's the key, is being able to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And taking feedback, which is all, these are all connected, but the idea that there will be people in your room coaching you and observing you and helping if you can take that. And one thing that I've become so clear on is with teachers, if I can't take feedback, then I don't even know how to give it. And grades are feedback. And so as a teacher, the more that you can understand the give and take and the usefulness of feedback, the better teacher you are because you can give good feedback to your students.
To add to that, I'm looking for someone who can be a team player, who can develop those relationships not only with the people they work with, but with the parents that they serve. When the parents walk in the door, I want that teacher to respect that parent enough to raise her head and say good morning. Yeah. I want that teacher to be a critical thinker, to analyze what she does, figure out what she did right and how she can correct it, and to work with her peers to get that done. The best partner for teachers is a teacher that's already doing it. Usually if you can find that partner, that mentor that's going to support you, because I can remember when and that was 100 years ago, I believe, when I started teaching, I'd come home every night and I could not cook dinner without taking me a little nap because I was so tired. So I want that teacher that's going to be tired at the end of the day and that's going to work with the parents and the children and appreciate, what the positive sides of the children. Because if you go into it and because the children don't look like you, they don't act like you, the parents don't dress like you, well then you're in the wrong business. You've got to be able to work with the whole, it takes a whole village to make sure that the children are successful. And when I'm interviewing a candidate, I try to pull that out. I like to give them scenarios so that they can answer those critical questions for me on how they would handle a situation. And then I'd like to go back and monitor to see how well they're doing and give them all the supports they need so that they can be successful. In Mississippi, we have a hard time getting certified pre-K teachers. We're just working toward that. So in Head Start, it's supposed to be full with all the systems in place for parent involvement and all of those other qualities that they have in Head Start. And Head Start is a wonderful program. But you've got to make sure that you have the right people on the bus. And that's what I see as a key ingredient to running a good program.
It's hard to add to this, but I'll do my best. And I think another really important role, and it sort of builds on what you just said, but is the ability to collaborate. I think, in whether it's in a classroom setting or in an early intervention setting, I think we're collaborating with child care providers, we're collaborating with physicians, we're collaborating with protective services for children. I mean, and there's just no way we can do the job without having those collaborative skills. And then in terms of the work with the children and the families, just being able to really be a good and non-judgmental listener and a reflective listener. And whether they're actually doing that with their colleagues or they're doing that with the families, it's a really basic skill. And that is one thing you really can hear in an interview, how well they listen, how well a person can listen and respond. And then I just think, basic personality characteristics of being non-judgmental, by being able to be flexible and being able to work independently, also as part of a team, but be able to think on your feet and work independently.
As someone what I would want an employer to know about me is that every interaction that I have with children, I want to be a quality interaction, and I would be willing to take any trainings, any mentoring, or anything to enhance that and ensure that that is happening in a classroom, because I think that's the most important.
As someone who would want an employer to know something about me in an interview, I think that the collaboration is really the biggest piece. Now, that's something that I'll admit that I really didn't understand in my undergrad. And I would have told you in an interview that, yeah, I want to work with people, and yeah, I'll take feedback, but I didn't understand how important that was until I stepped into that role and that position.
Well, you've all identified some important behaviors and qualities. How do you assess that, both in an interview and ongoing on the job? So what are the ways that you determine that those qualities and those behaviors, those skills that you're looking for actually happen, both in the interview process and ongoing? And anyone can answer that.
One of the ways I do it is that I go to the classrooms. I like being in the classrooms. I like to show up. I have 8 centers, and Harrison County is one of the second largest county in the state of Mississippi. So going to every center takes about half my day. But I like to see and talk to teachers and observe them working with their teacher assistant. I like for the teacher assistant to be a partner in that classroom. And I can tell the interaction between the teacher and the teacher assistant to tell whether they're collaborating. I also would want to make sure that the center manager is working with that teacher and collaborating with that teacher. So you can see those indicators of whether things are going right in that classroom for children. Also, you want to look at the assessments. You know, we have to do those 3-point assessments in Head Start, plus the class assessment. I think children are assessed a little bit too much. You might want to put that down. But I just think that just being there in the classroom, you cannot be an administrator if you never walk in the classroom. And if you can't be a good administrator if you don't know what you're looking at when you walk in the classroom. So you've got to be, and you need to talk to teachers. You don't just go in and sit down and write and never have a conversation with them. So that's how I do it.
I would agree, and not just talking to the teachers, but talking to the students and asking, simple questions. What are you doing right now? What are you supposed to be doing right now? How do you get the help that you need? Lots of ways you can ask those questions. I also spend time talking to the co-teaching team, and that might be paraprofessionals, it might be another licensed staff member, and really hearing from everyone how it's going. But I agree with Barbara that you can feel it, you can hear it, you can sense it when you walk in a room when it's working well. We have content coaches in our building and in our district, and when I have questions, if I see something and it doesn't sound or seem right, I will often go to the coach and ask, so should this have taken this long? Is this where they should be right now? It seems to me that, in my own teaching, I spent more time in the upper elementary grades in 4, 5, and 6 than I did in pre-K 3, so I need to depend upon the experts among us to say, so is this appropriate in a first grade classroom? It sure doesn't seem like it is, or it does seem like it is. Give me some feedback on that. So lots of huge amount of teamwork, a vast amount of teamwork in order to make it a well-oiled machine.
Well, relative to the interview process, I think like Barbara, I use a lot of scenarios and situations and ask people to respond in a really open-ended way to those scenarios, and you can pick up an awful lot relative to a person's belief systems, skill level, knowledge, and I think that's really a useful tool. And also how they might respond if I sort of kind of push back a little bit, and just how they respond to that. In terms of ongoing, I think the regular supervision that happens between supervisors and the staff that they are team leaders for, co-visits where the supervisor or another colleague will go off and do a co-visit with a staff member and their family. Often follow-up phone calls to families if we're sort of maybe a little bit concerned, or even just for quality assurance. I think you just use your multiple opportunities for observation. And if there's a problem, you can often just pick it up just by a hallway conversation, unfortunately. But it's, again, you sort of feel like, well, you've been presented with an opportunity, and I guess I'd rather be presented with that opportunity than miss it.
As you are, one question I guess I would just like to ask is sort of a yes or no. Do any of you use actual in-classroom observations of new candidates? In other words, when people are interviewing for a role, it could be in a classroom, but it could be something else, is there any simulation, or is there any opportunity for the person to have been in that environment and observed as part of the interview process?
We do.
Okay.
I can't say we do it for all of our hiring. We do it for all of our hiring of staff that might work in our center-based play groups. We typically always do it for that. And then, kind of depending on the interview and the interest of the candidate for the home visiting positions, the more developmental specialists and the other developmental therapists, it kind of depends.
Okay. And Hannah, when you were...
My school district does not.
Doesn't do
No,
that?
I just, we went through the process of hiring a third teacher for my building, and I was fortunate enough to be able to sit in on those interviews, and that was one of the things that we talked about. Well, these guys seem like great candidates on paper, and you can tell a lot based on their personality and how they interact with you in the interview, but that was that last piece between two candidates. We were saying, oh, I just wish that we could have video or be a fly on the wall in that classroom and see their interactions with the kids.
We had the discussion this year with some of I always have a teacher team help me with interviewing and find that it's much better. I don't make the decision as well on my own with interviewing, but the teachers felt, and this was very interesting, that it was a setup for those candidates and that they didn't believe that that was a fair way to interview. And so it's been a conversation ever since in our building about, well, it's not the way you were interviewed, but it doesn't mean it always has to be that way. And why does that feel like a setup? They don't know our kids. Our students can be challenging, but then wouldn't that be better to know if they could work with our children?
Thank you. Well, as you're interviewing candidates, what are some of the gaps that you may see in... Well, maybe let me back up for a minute. You just described what you are looking for. What, in fact, are the strengths that the early childhood professionals coming to you displaying in those interviews? What are those initial early career strengths that you are seeing in the early childhood professional community? And then we'll go to gaps. But let's start with strengths.
The greatest strength that I see consistently is wanting to be there, caring about the students, and really putting the effort in to figure it out and to become stronger as a teacher. I think the eagerness, the sense that this is a service is starting to sink in at the college level. I know for years and years, teachers didn't seem to hear that this is a service profession, that we're actually serving. And I really don't mean that to diss teachers. It just seemed not to be part of our education. And now I think that is part of the education, and that's huge, because to be in this as a service professional is a mindset that changes everything about how we do the work.
Anyone else?
One of my first questions to teachers is, tell me, what would you do on your very first day of school?
That's a good question.
And I think that now when they come to me and they answer that question, they're very prepared to say what they would do on the very first day of school. They can tell you how to set the classroom up for literacy, how to make sure that the children are comfortable in the classroom. They can tell you all of those things in an interview. But sometime I'll talk about that later.
Okay. So they've got the knowledge.
They've got the knowledge base, yes.
Okay.
To follow up on knowledge base, I think one of the big differences I see more recent educators that I've hired is I think the concept of developmentally appropriate practice, it's stuck. I mean, I just feel like that is just something that is used to in interviewing in the past. Some people really had it, some people didn't, and I feel like that knowledge is much stronger. And I think the other thing that's coming along but still has a ways to go is the ability or the knowledge around working with families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want to add anything? Hannah, what did you see in the two candidates that were so wonderful?
Well, as we talked about, we wish that we could see them in the classroom as kind of the deciding factor. What we took away from that was at this point, if they got to that interview in that position, that we believed that they would both be excellent teachers in the classroom. And at that point, what we then went to was that collaboration and that teamwork, and how we had myself sat in, our speech pathologist, another school psych, and then our administrator. And what we decided on was how we felt that they would collaborate with us, how they would work together with us. I have a pretty unique building where there are 8 preschools in our district, 5 of which are housed within elementary buildings. My building is just early childhood education. There's 3 preschool classrooms. So we felt that we really had a neat opportunity to do some really special things, especially with literacy and kind of those higher level for the kids that were ready, and how those teachers might step into that role and what they would bring to collaborating and teamwork.
Okay. All right, now, what gaps do you see in either the knowledge or the skills that you would think of for a beginning professional? And we're thinking about teachers, but we're also thinking about any early childhood professional that is relevant to you. So what gaps come in either their knowledge or their skills? Anybody can answer.
I don't know if it's necessarily a gap, especially when you framed it as for a new educator, but one of the things I really want to make sure that newer educators and also more experienced early intervention providers is just to get access to all of the new brain research and the impact of toxic stress, the impact of neglect, a lot of the sort of the Jack Shonkoff education that we're all learning from, and the impact of trauma, because I think between neglect, toxic stress, and trauma, it's impacting so many of the families, so many of the children, and it impacts every moment that we're working with them. So, okay.
Laura?
One of the gaps that I see is I work with other peers in my community that are just opening up their child care programs, and they don't have a basic understanding of child development. So they don't have any education about the brain development or anything that I think is so important to be able to do quality interactions with children, and some of them can't work with the families. They're really great with kids, but they can't work with other adults, which, I think when you open up a program, you don't think of that. You don't think, well, oh, I've got to interact with those parents every day, or they have no sense of starting a business. So I see those as really large gaps in the field of family child care, and I think a lot of that is because these types of opportunities for them to receive those trainings aren't available.
Okay. Anybody else?
I see a gap with them understanding children of poverty. If you come into a school or to a child care center, Head Start, the majority of my children, probably less than 10% of them, I'd say 95% of my children are children of poverty. And we tend to judge people by who we are versus who you're working with. And so they don't understand the parents or the children. So I believe we really, really need to look at that particular area when you're working with children of poverty and teach our students how to work with children of poverty. The other one is the mental health issues that come with the trauma. And you mentioned that, Margaret, the trauma that children come from. When they're living in a poverty-stricken area and they see the violence, they see all of the things that happen in the community. Well, those things come into the classroom. They don't leave that doesn't leave them when they get to the classroom. It's still with them. And so we've got to have teachers to have some experience with not only working with middle class, but working with children who've had these experiences. And to couple that, I would say classroom management. A lot of the things that we see in classrooms where teachers will say, I can't deal with this child, I can't do this. Their management skills in the classrooms are lacking. There's a gap there with how you manage that classroom. Those are the 3 areas that I have concerns for.
I would agree with that. The biggest gap that concerns me is our teachers have a lack of awareness of racial awareness and cultural awareness for the children that they're serving. And so because of that inability to recognize that I teach my own culture before I do anything else, that really is a setup for some of our students. Connected to that is the lack of urgency for too many of our staff, where they just don't have the awareness or the urgency to get this done. I heard a lot this morning about the incrementalism of the work we do, and that is a very dangerous concept in education, because it gives us all a free card to sleep well at night when we're failing our students. And so, you know, I get it that we're not going to fix it overnight, but at the same time, when we all accept that this is incremental work and little tiny baby steps are okay, that's what's been going on my whole career. And so I'm not sure that that's going to get us where we need to go. And how about if we change that mindset completely, and what might that do to our educational system?
Can I add one more thing? The one thing that I've noticed is that we assume, we all make that mistake, that because I know I'm African American, that I really understand children of poverty. Well, that's not true. It's not true. You need to make sure, just because you're hiring someone and they're African American does not mean they understand African American children who are living in poverty. And the same thing happens with Hispanic children and all the other children that live in poverty in this country. So the urgency is there to look at diversity and address diversity in a more broad spectrum.
Anybody want to add?
I think that one of the things that would have helped me to better be prepared for working in early childhood is this family and school collaboration piece and that home visit piece, where we we talked about it a little bit in my undergrad, but then I was almost thrown into it. And I'm only required to do 2 per child per year versus the birth to 3 teachers that work in my school district, and that's all they do. So if I'm qualified to be a birth to 3 teacher, but if I would have been and stepped into that role, I don't know that I would have been prepared working with the families, stepping into their homes, and being able to build that relationship in that way.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears just a little bit here, and I want to ask, what role does credentialing, accreditation, some of the formal structures that the field has in place, what role do those things play in the proficiency of the people that you see? They may be your peers, they may be your employees, but what do you see? Do those things make a difference? Yes, Laura.
I'll talk about it from the basis of family child care and having an accredited program. When I go into a nationally accredited program, I see that the work that the teacher is doing is much more intentional with the children, because she's thought about where she wants to be and what she wants to do, and she knows what she's looking for. I will tell you that 12 years ago, when I first became accredited, it changed my whole view of early care and education, because I really had to be intentional. I couldn't just, it wasn't just about just taking care of children. It was being very intentional in every aspect of caring for the children and the families. And I see such a difference. In Vermont, we only, unfortunately, have 7 nationally accredited family child care programs. But those programs have such higher quality that they're offering. They never have wait lists. They're always full. They're doing all kinds of other services and having other service providers come in because they see the benefit of it for children. So I think it just gives you a much clearer idea of what quality care looks like.
Anyone else?
Of course I have something to say. I would like to say that the program that I have now, I worked in Chapel Hill. All of our centers were 5-star, and we had NACI accreditation, and we had all of those things, and I worked through that system to make sure that happened, working with the teachers and other staff members. The challenge I have now is to get my staff members to think above just performance standards and start looking at quality childcare, being NACE accredited and getting the stars. So we are in the process now. I have one center who actually went through the process, and the center manager texted me all day yesterday, and she wanted to let me know that she was doing well, and she has the largest, one of the largest centers, and it is probably the worst center we have as far as a facility is concerned. But she did good, so I wanted her to take it on first so that the centers who did not, who are brand new centers, have everything going for them, they wouldn't have an excuse. So I'm trying to get them to get excited about thinking above performance standards and think about quality, because when you have quality centers, not only do you attract the grants, but you also attract those paying customers who want their children in a Head Start center, because Head Start has had such a bad name over the years of not having good quality. And I believe that if we're going to spend this kind of money in Head Start, we should offer quality for the children. And so I'm really one of the sticklers for quality.
Okay. Anyone else?
I will just say that the actual teaching certification in a pre-K through elementary grades is bare bones minimum, get me in the door, get me a job certification, and generally does minimal to really prepare teachers to do the job. It gives them a mindset, hopefully it gives them some basic skills, and then from that point forward, the rest of their career needs to be seeking out continuous education around content knowledge, around childhood development, around the cultural and racial aspects that I've talked about already, and then just the idea that if they really specialize, something like reading recovery training goes a huge, huge distance to close gaps for our students. National Board for Certification, something like that does a lot to help a teacher become reflective and go deeper. So the actual degree, that bachelor's degree, or even if it's a master's, but it's their entry into teaching, it opens the door. It doesn't really prepare them to teach. It takes so much more to do that.
Well, where do you turn for help? Where do you get this professional development? What resources do you have access to? And how effective are they?
If you look at reading recovery training, which is expensive, and it's actually it's too expensive as a program for us to afford it in our school. For me to hire a reading recovery teacher, that person would generally work with 8 first graders during a year, and pretty much guarantee those first graders would reach would meet their needs literacy-wise. But that's a full FTE for 8 students, and it just isn't affordable. But if the teachers get the reading recovery training where they are working with colleagues, they are being coached behind the glass, so they have a student and they're teaching the student one-on-one reading, they've got coaches giving them feedback, they've got each other giving feedback, then they take it into the school and they practice it with the student and they continuously analyze their data and improve their teaching from there. That's a highly effective model. It also causes or expects a teacher to put in, I don't know, probably another 30 or 40 hours a year to get that training. So something like that, as effective as it is not very common.
Other thoughts? Where you go for professional development, support, or help?
Well, I think it sort of echoes some of the thoughts this morning. There are, often many opportunities for professional development, and depending on what the individual needs, I think there's a lot. There are a lot of opportunities, but I just feel like that one-on-one mentorship and coaching is the one that pays off the most. And I know that often when we hire new staff, that's something we offer them so that they can get that additional support for at least the first 6 months of the year, so that they're not just kind of out there on their own. I think on top of that, I think most programs offer pretty good intensive orientation and training. And I think there are in Massachusetts, there's trainings available offered by the State Department of Public Health, as well as many other programs, but it's really that coaching and mentoring that really pays off. Similar to reading recovery, though, it's very expensive. It's you're giving up a staff's clinical time for which they can't be billing for clinical work while they're coaching and supervising another staff member, but it does pay off.
Hannah, can I ask you specifically what kind of professional development, you've been in the classroom 2 years, so what kind of professional development opportunities have you gotten, say, within your school district?
Well, within my school district, we have been trying to grow. Right now we have 8, and we are really trying to make it known to the whole district that we really exist. There are some teachers within our school district that don't even know that there's a preschool program. So we've been really pushing with the whole district to include us in things. This last year, we've been included in some of the writing workshops, some of the literacy and math workshops. Some of the math coaches have come out to speak just with our preschool team. And that's been really beneficial. However, I do still feel like there is a major gap between that pre-K and the math coaching and the literacy coaching that we get and that kindergarten level of all of those components of curriculum.
Do you get a pre-K coaching that's different than the K? 4 or 5?
Basically, what they would do is, well, for some of the workshops, they threw us in with the kindergarten teachers, and that was almost offensive to us, the way that it turned out to be. But then, since then, they have done separate, and they've kind of taken some of the kindergarten components and pulled out to what they think would be most relevant to us. So that was much nicer than that first workshop was just kind of a disaster.
I'd like to add that I think that the 2-hour workshops that a lot of agencies offer, which is one of the options for professional development opportunities in our state, are not as effective as the presenters might think that they are. I think that you get much more out of something that has an aspect of somebody coming in and seeing if you're actually doing what you learned. There's some follow through to it. I get much more out of going to something that's 6 or 8 weeks long than I do out of 2 hours of somebody spending the first 20 minutes introducing themselves and then lecturing at me for the rest of the time. I'm less apt to go home and implement that in my program. And I do find that as a non-traditional student, having the opportunity to go to school on weekends and online has been a savior for me. So any of you that are planning that type of education, continue with the online and the weekend classes that make it more accessible for us that are working 10, 12 hours a day.
And I think that as Stacy talked about, that bare bones, just get your foot in the door. I didn't make it through my first year before I realized I need to start pursuing my master's right away. And so that was something that I did, and I went forward with. And when taking the classes in the master's level, and I'm getting my master's in special education with an emphasis in early childhood, that's helping to close some of the gaps. But when we're talking about undergraduate level, it really is just those bare bones, get your foot in the door. And a lot of it is that on-the-job experience and on-the-job training that you could never get in 4 years of college.
I would like to also add that we have content coaches in our building, and they are hired specifically to work with the teachers in an embedded professional development manner all day long. And that's absolutely key, that they need to be in there. They work with them in PLCs, but then they also go in and model instruction. They watch teachers and they give feedback. And so it's a continuous loop of what are we hearing from the district, what's going on in our curriculum, what is our data telling us, and then how are we continuously improving in instruction. So to me, that coaching piece, I don't know how to administer a school without coaches helping.
Okay. That's the model that we're going to this coming year, is to have a trainer, a coach, who goes in, does the training, and observe the teacher in the classroom, give her feedback, and then go back and do additional training, because what we've seen is the large group trainings, that's just a waste of money. And most of my staff, when you get 270 people in a class, you're not doing very much training. You're just kind of just getting through the day. So we're breaking it up into small centers, and we're doing that coaching model for this coming year.
Well, let me ask this last question before we open it up to the audience to ask you some questions. This morning's group of panels was brought up more than once about the stress that people feel in early childhood and the need for health and well-being, for some balance or some sense of health and well-being. What have you seen, what do your programs do that address the stress that the professionals may be experiencing and their need for health and well-being? Any takers?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
After being at Gulf Coast for about 6 months, I figured out I needed to work on that one. So I partnered with a child psychologist at Tulane University to come up with a plan to work not only with the teachers, but to work with the teacher, the parent, and the child. So to help with that stressor. As you know, our area went through Katrina, and we've had, some of our families, some of the children, not the children we have now, but some of the parents of the children, after going through all of that stress, it seems that they have a few anger issues. And so I knew I needed to have something more than what we could offer in Head Start. So I partnered with the professor. He comes over and he does training with the parent. He does parent training in the afternoon. He answers those questions that parents want to ask the psychologist, but in the African American community, you really don't go see a psychologist, but you can go if it's a parent training. So that worked out for me. They can ask questions of that psychologist. They give him feedback. He gives them things to do with their children at home. He gives the teacher things to do with the child in the classroom, and that has really, really helped with the stressors that we've seen throughout the year, this year. So that extra, it's a little bit more than you normally do in a school, but it has really worked for me, and it has been a success. Basically, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I just think it's really important to make sure you provide a supportive and flexible work environment, and I think some work environments it's a little more easy to be flexible than others, and the availability of regular available reflective supervision is really important. And I think one of the really important things, especially for some of the newer staff coming in, is supporting them on the development of appropriate boundaries, because I think in our work we can sometimes push ourselves beyond the appropriate boundaries, and I think that just really can lead to burnout. And then providing the supports to build on that sense of confidence and competence, because I think when you don't feel competent, that's when you want to walk out the door. And providing a sense that you're part of a team. I think team building and letting staff know that they can rely on their teammates as much as they can rely on their supervisors, that's really important. And then I think to echo the points brought up this morning around, again, it's that compensation word. I think early childhood isn't compensated appropriately, early intervention's not compensated appropriately, and I think one thing that would really help with that is loan forgiveness. These kids are coming out of school with thousands and thousands of dollars of loans, and many of them can't even stay in our field because they just can't afford to do it. Their heart is there, but they just can't do it, and those are the people that come into your office in tears because they need to leave because they can't afford to continue to work.
What's worked for me is knowing what my limits are and having a wonderful mentor that I've had for 20 years that understands me and understands my needs and can say, whoa, you need to back up a little bit because that plate looks like you should go to a 10-inch plate instead of an 8.5-inch plate. And be really honest about it, and me being able to say, yeah, okay, let's rethink that. So I think that a mentor is just the most wonderful thing to have.
I've been trying to model as an instructional leader how to do all of these things, because I really think that if I say one thing and do another, it's what I do that matters and is noticed. And it's the same with our adults. If we really believe that we have efficacy in our work, then it'll show with how we interact with kids. So we brought yoga into our school for the adults as well as for the children. Yoga Calm for the children, and yoga after school on one night a week for the adults who wanted to be there. Making sure the systems are pretty strong is one of the best ways to ease teacher anxiety or all staff anxiety. I found that if they feel like they're in an unsteady system or an unpredictable, and it is unpredictable no matter what, but if they feel like the system is there to support them, generally that is much better for mindset and for peace of mind. I have found that the data is what calms us faster than anything, because we're in this year of major transition. We have students who have been historically out of our school, out of our rooms in separate programming, which, by the way, are 99% black boys. And so, when we talk about how race matters, it really matters in what we do in public education. But now these students, all of the students are in our classrooms, and so if I have a parent who's worried or teachers who are complaining and saying, everything's falling apart, we look at our data and we say, all of our behavior data is going down. They are not, kids are not being sent out of the classroom. They're not being referred out for behavior the way they were in October. Our test scores are going up. Our PLC scores are going up. And so by just looking at the data, it kind of calms us and centers us again. And then one final thing that I've learned to do as a principal is tell the truth to the staff, no matter how scary that is, because that's what we have to do to each other. For each other, to trust each other and have relationships, and then give them permission to take risks and to think outside of the box, and to know that when they do, I'm not going to come up and cut them off at the knees if it doesn't work the first time or the 8th time. So that how do we stay in this together with permission and courage is where we keep going for mental health.
Well, I promised the panel before I opened it up to you all that they would have one last shot, because here they are in front of this really important panel on thinking about child development and early childhood, and they would have a chance to tell you one thing if it didn't get covered already in the panel. So this is your chance to tell us that one last thing before we open it to questions. So Stacy, do you have one last thing you'd like to say?
That's so dangerous. I think that the last thing I will say right now is that I am concerned that if this panel is making decisions based on not hearing from teachers, and I mean really hearing the voices of teachers, then you won't have the information you need. So I'm looking at who's here this week, and I'm thinking this isn't exactly the people that you need to be hearing from, because it's the practitioners, like our young woman on the end, who will tell you the most about what's working and not working.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that, you probably want to talk to some of the parents also.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because they are the ones that can tell you what works for them and what works for their children. The other thing is I'd like to say is just thank you for even addressing this issue of early childhood, because it's a long-standing concern that we should have addressed maybe 20 years ago, and this country would be a little bit better off. So I'd just like to say thank you, and thank you for listening to me.
And I think it's, thank you. And I think it's particularly telling that the group that is sponsoring this is the National Research Council, part of the Institute of Medicine, and obviously a lot of the brain research that's come out over the last several years has just sort of codified what all of these wonderful early childhood people have already known and have already kind of figured out, and it's been confirmed and has kind of raised to the level of, I don't know, legitimacy, and I just appreciate that.
Laura?
I'd like to ask a favor. Could we define professional development so we're all on the same page of what it means across all avenues of early care and education? Thank you.
Hannah?
You guys said it all.
All right. I'd like to open it up. We have about 20 minutes for questions. Ross? And here comes the microphone down the way. It's for us.
Ross Thompson, UC Davis. Thank you very much. I mean, actually, this is the payoff for listening to people in the field. There are some reports out there, and certainly this is what I hear when I speak to other practitioner groups, that the degree of stress that children are experiencing and bringing into the classroom has been ramping up. And some of the themes that you wish teachers knew more about, poverty, trauma, neglect, seem to reflect that. First of all, I'm interested if you agree with that in your experience, but secondly, are the strategies as a skill set to manage or to help children and their families, interestingly enough, who are under this kind of stress, part of the skill set that teachers come into the field with? And if not, how do they acquire it? How do we begin dealing with this issue?
Anyone may respond.
I don't believe they come into the field with it. I believe that what has happened in my situation is when I am faced with that in my program, I then go out and get the information and the education that I need. My local colleges is where I've been getting it.
I do think sometimes we expect too much from teachers. That, yes, they can be aware of the needs of children with these issues, but when it boils down to it, they're there to educate the children, and they can't do it if they have a child that's totally out of control, and they need additional supports in that classroom. So as administrators, it's our job to find those additional supports rather than put that total responsibility on the classroom teacher when they have, maybe 15, 20 other children in that classroom. So when you do this report, there has to be a component for administrators and superintendents, those people who pay the bills, to be responsible for those issues.
In terms of resources, I mean, this is a group of experts and probably know many more resources than we can tell you from up here, but I think we've been using a lot, and I'm sure Head Start has as well, the CEFL training module, and I just think it can be used in so many different ways. But I think it's also about having a system of supports. I remember having a conversation with some of my colleagues shortly after Newtown, and I think we were all feeling like the one thing that would really make a difference was, rather than getting guards in schools, is to have every school have another couple social workers who just work in the schools and can provide the supports for the staff, can provide the supports for the kids, can provide the supports for the kids who are at risk of becoming bullies, or the children who are at risk of becoming victims. And just because you're right, the teachers can't do all of this. We expect so much from teachers. Teachers can set a tenor in a classroom and create a safe environment and environment of respect, but schools need more now.
I'm definitely seeing an increase also. I think, that's pretty typical. And everything you just said is I think, exactly right on. And then what Hannah has also mentioned several times, which is But you don't send the child out to that other expert and expect the child to be fixed and come back in after 20 minutes of meeting with the social worker and everything will be fine. It's, the mindset has to be, we're a team, and how does this team work with the child and the child's parents? And how do we get some of that below-the-line information that we haven't typically received or asked for or cared about for our families? And so that the below-the-line information as we receive it is very valuable and often can get us to a place that we wouldn't have gotten a few years ago with our families.
And I think it goes back to when you were talking about what makes a good teacher, is that being that lifelong learner. When students come into your classroom with a disability that you've never heard of or some extenuating circumstance, that you go out and you get the information, and that's what makes good educators.
Another question? Oh, over here? Oh, I'm sorry. LaRue? You're in the spotlight, LaRue, so it's hard to see you, sorry.
LaRue Allen from New York University. I wanted, especially on the heels of the responses to Ross's questions, to return to the question of professional development. Can you say something about how you establish priorities in your professional development ladder, and how you establish those priorities for yourself as well as for your staff? And can you tell us about the various funding sources that you use to pay for that professional development? Thank you.
St. Paul Public Schools receives some extraordinarily strong ongoing professional development. And so I believe that I'm speaking from a spoiled place around some of this. But as a district, we have had a pretty united front with what is expected as far as district level, staff level professional development. And then it's been set up so that it is paid for. And to be really honest, I don't even know where the money comes from. So, you know, they pay for it and we go. And what we've learned is that having been a district literacy coach myself, I have this great insider knowledge that the people who are working for the district are really smart and really know their stuff and can do a great job. And so I have a lot of trust there. And that's really helped me at the school level to work with our district professional developers in a way that helps our school and builds us from the roots up. We, right now in St. Paul, a huge push for us is racial equity work. And so we work with Pacific Education Group, PEG, as an umbrella environment for us to have all staff receive some very basic understanding of racial awareness and then to go deeper into that. And so for Frost Lake, that's been the focus for several years now. And what I know is that if we touch on this and then we touch on that and then we touch on something else, none of that sinks in. If we stay focused and we really go deeper into understanding our students and working with our families, we still talk about reading curriculum, we still learn about reading strategies, we still do all kinds of stuff around math, but the big difference now is that we look at everything through the lens of race. And so we're really looking at it and saying, so what about this policy? What about this practice? What about this teaching strategy? And which of our students are benefiting from it and which of our students are not? And how might poverty have a piece of it? With our kids, it's 88% free and reduced lunch, so we know that's a big piece of it. But how might race or culture or language also play into this, and what will that do for our professional development? So I think more than anything, what we've learned is keep the main thing, and don't, keep jumping off and doing something else so that we can actually get better at something rather than, what's the flavor of the month idea.
For us, we're in a different situation. We look at the data. We look at the data from our class scores, from our 3 checkpoints, and I actually look at them myself. I also survey the teachers and ask what their needs are. From that, we do pay for our We have TNTA funds. You know, you're in Head Start. For those people who are familiar with Head Start knows that we have training and technical assistant funds that we have to put toward professional development. We partner with school districts. I have 5 school districts in the Harrison County area that we serve, so I partner with those districts and send some teachers sometime to their trainings that may be kindergarten, pre-K kindergarten training. We have a grant through the Kellogg Foundation that's with one of the school districts, and they give additional training for those teachers. The state agency offers training, and we sometimes pull in another Head Start trainer. So it just depends. But again, I'm changing my strategy for this coming year. I'm using my school system background and going to mentor coaches for most of my training.
Okay.
Some of the training that is offered in the early intervention system is offered by our State Department of Public Health, who has the responsibility for making sure early intervention staff become certified early intervention staff members in time. But a lot of our training is really the things that happen on site. Some of it's coaching, some of it's small group training that's focused on first-year employees where it's more the basics, and some of it's larger group trainings, and a lot of those topics are really based on what the program need happens to be at the moment. And some of that is a series, like we're in the midst of a feeding series right now, because we've just felt like that was a great need, and we just need to get more people comfortable with that skill set. So it varies, but the training that happens at our program is just eked out of the budget, and the money's not coming from anywhere else.
I base my training needs on what I see for children coming into my program and what needs that I need to increase my knowledge in. So my typical trainings will come out of my work budget, but my grad degree is coming out of student loans. So.
Okay. Was there a question right here? Thank you.
Kathleen Halverson, California Department of Education. As a follow-up to the stress management question, I was just wondering, as far as the organizational skills and time management of teachers, where do they learn those skills? I was just reflecting back on my first year of teaching, and those were 2 skills I didn't feel like I got in my pre-service training.
Okay. On the job
training. You make a mistake one week and you figure it out the next week. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the practical experience. And it's not something that I had multiple practicums throughout my undergraduate degree, but that's not something that you even can figure out until that first year of teaching. Do you
think it would have helped if there was some discussion, if it was included in the pre-service training?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, and I think that that's, again, one of those things that, as an undergrad, that I never thought about. I never thought about having to work with another adult. I never thought about where does all of that organization come from and how would I apply it in a classroom. That's, all of the things that you cover, curriculum, you're learning about literacy, you're learning about how to integrate the students into the classroom, and it's just not a topic that's really touched on until you're in the grind, I guess.
I think also the question, it can be, it's such a technical question, and some of the danger in how we train teachers is we go to the technical, almost to the checklist. So if you're going to manage your time, this is how you do it. And then a teacher thinks that they have it, they get into the classroom, and it's a totally adaptive moment, and that checklist doesn't work in this room or in this school. And so it's far more helpful for our teachers to come in with that adaptive stance of, I could do this, I could do that, or I could go Google it. I could figure out different ways to get my answers. There's a lot of danger in thinking, the one-size-fits-all technical solution to the questions.
We have Albert. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're drawing to a close.
Hi, thank thank you for all of your comments. This question is in reaction to what Stacy said, but anybody can take it, including Stacy. So I appreciate your comment about the lack of urgency and wanting to go beyond incrementalism. Maybe there's something more behind that. I was wondering if there was something you want to sort of completely kind of go 180 degrees on in terms of birth to 8.
Blow up the system and start over?
Yeah, what do you have in mind?
Okay. You know, it really, it's that whole idea of being in an adaptive space versus the checklist space. And we come through college, I came through college, and I still see teachers coming out thinking that if I do these 5 things, I nailed it and I can go home and sleep well at night. And they're not looking at whether or not the children have learned anything from them that day. They're looking at, did I do what I was supposed to do? And so for me, the incrementalism of it gives us permission to say it's going to take 7 to 12 years before children will learn this or that or whatever. And as long as I can say that, I don't have to worry about if they learned it under my watch, because it's someone else's responsibility down the road. It's related to the idea also that I was trained as a teacher and even as an administrator how to document children out of my classroom and out of my school, not how to keep them in and teach them in my school or in my classroom. And so the idea that we're shifting how we look at the way we teach children and the way we work with our students and families is really about letting go of giving myself permission to not think it'll take 7 to 12 years, to not be really good at documenting them out of my space, but keeping them in my space and getting better at working with them in my space rather than the opposite. And to give you an answer that's really, you know, these 5 things goes against all of that. So it is still that idea that you have to be in it, and I have to figure it out for this child differently for that child, for this classroom in a different way maybe than for that classroom. And as an administrator, that's a really scary place to be, because I'm essentially giving everyone permission to try everything that's going to work and then share it so that we can see if it's working. And so the data is huge, because if we're not continuously watching our data, we can go down, you know, trails that take us nowhere. But if we don't give ourselves permission to try that trail, we just do it the way we've always done it, and it doesn't work the way we're doing it, at least not for most of the kids in our school.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
She nailed it.
There's a question in the back.
Hello again, this is Susan Thompson with the bad voice. Stacy, I'd like to pick up something you said, and I'd like to connect it to Ross's last question. Ross was asking about when children come into your school and classrooms, they may be suffering from atypical brain development due to fetal alcohol syndrome, drugs, they may have PTSD, live in stressful environments, domestic violence. If we have an urgency to help those children, it seems to me that we have to have some preparation in teacher ed. So when they come to your school and all these young children come tumbling in your doors and they have not been identified, that teachers have some basic ideas of what to look for through individualizing instruction. And I wondered if you might comment on that for us.
Yes, I agree with that, and I think there's a lot of danger in that at the same time, because if I am, as an inexperienced person, trying to diagnose brain trauma about a student, and I don't have that background or that skill, it's just a different way for me to document him out of my room. And so a person has to be really thoughtful about, am I bringing my own preconceived notions, and so am I deciding that this child has some form of trauma or has something wrong with him or her, or is there just a different approach that I need to take with this child in order to be successful? And so I'm not saying that we don't become more knowledgeable about brain research and also about trauma. We are definitely doing that in our school. But I think there's danger in someone walking out now and going back into their classroom and saying, oh, mental illness, oh, trauma, oh. And so I think it's something we really want to be careful how we set that up in a way that is just not doing the same stuff with a different name.
And I think Stacy's right, because when in special ed, you know, you label the child LD, you label him ED, you put those hats on top of that child's head. Once you do that, the teacher says, well, I can't teach him. He's emotionally disturbed. I can't teach him because he's LD, and I'm not trained to be an LD teacher. So we have to really be careful about how we begin to label children and tell teachers it's your responsibility to teach. I'm going to give you all the tools you need, and I'm going to support you as a teacher, but your job is to teach. And to do anything different is a disservice to the children that we're serving.
We've set it up so that we have co-teachers like Hannah's doing, so that in the room there is another special ed teacher co-teaching as a partner in that room. And that we found is far more effective to bring that expertise and that expert knowledge. And what we're finding, particularly in pre-K through third grade, is we're heading off the special ed diagnoses, so that we're not even having to go there, because we're actually intervening in an effective way before. And we don't even need to know sometimes if there's trauma. We just need to know what the child needs educationally wise and wrap around emotionally in order to support them.
Anybody want to add anything? There. One last question? No? Joshua, over here. This will be our last for today, for this panel.
Hi, Josh Brown, Fordham University. Thank you all for your presentations. Each of you, or some of you, had mentioned using data to drive your decision making, and I'm just wondering a little bit about how integrated your data systems are and the way you use data to sort of help guide your thinking over time for a child, not just within a year, but particularly across years. And I'm thinking about, for example, teachers discussing children from year to year, so that the next grade's teacher knows what's to come in the classroom, and how data driven is that?
We are we have a reading program called Mondo, which is, they have an online data source so that we can see like 8 different data points for a child's reading score, anything from oral language to their reading level, et cetera. And so that's something that we can share, not just year to year, but from the fall to the winter to the spring, and really track growth in that way. So what we've found is using anything like that has some, the more objective those numbers, the more helpful they are generally for that type of long-term conversation and long-term evaluation of how is our program doing. The PLC data is less objective, and it's taking longer to get our teachers to really use that time and use that type of a format to gather data that's more helpful. It's almost like they're using it as a study group rather than a data collection system. And so it depends upon the form of data, but we found that our MCA data, which is our state tests, our state No Child Left Behind testing, is not all that helpful, because it's measuring the different children over the years in a different system and with a different teacher. But our in-building curriculum tested data is more helpful than anything else.
This past September, my family child care program entered into a contract with our local elementary school, and I'm doing teaching strategies, gold observations on all the children in my care, and those observations will follow them through the third grade, because they'll then transfer all that information over into the school system. So they'll have some type of data from birth through third grade on how they've developed.
Cool. Wow. Hannah, were you going to say anything?
No, well, we use Teaching Strategies Gold as well, but within our district, we just use it with the birth to 5 realm, and then once they go to kindergarten, that data is null, really. But it is kind of nice. It's more, we use it more with our children with special needs, and when we have transition meetings from the preschool to the kindergarten realm, that's when we kind of use some of those things.
Were you going to say something, Margaret?
We're not doing it in our program, but the state of Massachusetts is beginning to do a pilot project looking at early intervention children and following them into the school system to see how these kids are looking years down the road. And I think they have some really rich information, and it'll be really interesting to see where that goes.
So quite an array of approaches to using data. Well, please join me in thanking our panel. I was struck by how often we kind of went back to the two panels from the morning, but this kind of puts a face on it with individual people. And so we appreciate very much your coming and doing this. We had talked about the fact that they were asked not to bring any PowerPoints or any predetermined presentations, and no one was exactly sure that they'd be interesting enough to not hold your attention, but to, be able to have this robust conversation. I think that we found that you were quite fascinating and quite informative. So thank you very much, and thank you, everyone.